Las Vegas, Nevada, December 2019. The Strip glows like a neon river cutting through the desert night. Inside the Nova Star Casino, a low-end property on the outskirts of downtown, a young man clears dishes from a high-roller table. His name is Ethan Vale. He's 23 years old, a mathematics student at UNLV, working his second job of the day to stay enrolled. Ethan is exhausted. He's been awake since 6 a.m., classes until 2, tutoring job until 6. Now this, clearing plates and wiping tables while wealthy tourists throw away more money in an hour than he makes in a week. His feet hurt. His back aches. He has a statistics assignment due tomorrow that he hasn't started. But Ethan loves numbers. Always has. While other busboys talk about sports or gossip about coworkers, Ethan watches the casino floor. He watches the patterns, the flow of money, the psychology of gambling, the mathematics of chance. Tonight, while clearing a table near the digital roulette section, Ethan sees something that changes everything. One of the automated roulette wheels glitches. The display freezes for a moment, shows number 17, then immediately shows 17 again on the next spin. Two identical results in under 3 seconds. The second result is quickly voided by the system, marked as a display error. The few players at the terminal barely notice, but Ethan notices. Because in true random systems, getting the same number twice in a row is unlikely, but possible. Getting it in under 3 seconds before the ball could physically complete another spin is impossible, unless the system isn't generating truly random results. Unless there's a pattern. Ethan stands there with a tray of dirty glasses, staring at the roulette wheel, his mind racing through probability theory and algorithmic generation. He's supposed to be working. He's supposed to be invisible. But he's just seen something that shouldn't exist, a crack in the foundation of chance. Over the next 8 months, Ethan Vale will turn a $200 student loan refund into $47 million. He won't hack computers. He won't cheat. He'll simply understand the mathematics better than the engineers who designed the system. Before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe, and hit that notification bell to boost this episode. Drop a comment below with your city or country. I'm always curious where you're watching from. Ethan Vale was born in 2006 in Henderson, Nevada, a suburb of Las Vegas. His father, Marcus Vale, worked construction. His mother, Linda, was a clerk at a grocery store. They lived in a small apartment in a complex where the air conditioning barely worked and the neighbors were loud. Ethan was brilliant from an early age, not in an obvious, prodigy way. He didn't skip grades or win national competitions. He just understood patterns, numbers, systems. While other kids played video games for fun, Ethan played them to understand the underlying mechanics, the probability of loot drops, the algorithm behind enemy behavior, the patterns in procedurally generated levels. In high school, Ethan's math teacher, a woman named Margaret Reynolds, noticed his potential. Ethan didn't just solve problems, she said in an interview after the case became public. He understood why the problems existed. He could see the structure underneath the question. I encouraged him to apply to MIT, Caltech, places like that. But his family couldn't afford it, and he didn't want to take on massive debt. So Ethan stayed local. He enrolled at UNLV in 2017, majoring in applied mathematics. He lived at home to save money. He worked 2 part-time jobs to cover tuition, books, and expenses that his small scholarship didn't cover. Tutoring in the afternoons, bussing tables at the Nova Star at night. The Nova Star Casino was a third-tier property, not glamorous, not on the Strip, the kind of place where locals went to play penny slots and tourists stayed because it was cheap. Ethan started working there in his sophomore year, 3 nights a week, clearing tables, refilling water glasses, being invisible. His co-worker, a man named Carlos Mendez, remembers Ethan as quiet but observant. He never talked much, always seemed like he was thinking about something else. I'd try to make conversation, ask him about school, and he'd answer politely but distantly. Like his mind was somewhere else. I figured he was just tired. We all were. But Ethan wasn't tired. He was fascinated. Working in a casino while studying probability theory was like being a biology student working in a zoo. Everything around him was a living example of the mathematics he studied. The house edge, expected value, variance, standard deviation, all of it playing out in real time on the casino floor. Ethan particularly noticed the digital roulette wheels. The Nova Star had 4 of them, automated terminals where players could bet on roulette without a live dealer. The wheels were manufactured by a company called Quantum Spin Gaming, a mid-tier supplier that used random number generators synchronized with the casino's central server. According to the technical specifications, the RNG was tested and certified. Perfectly random, no predictable patterns. But Ethan had learned in his coursework that true randomness is actually very difficult to achieve in computer systems. Pseudo-random number generators use algorithms, seeds, and system clocks to create sequences that appear random but are actually deterministic if you know the initial conditions. On that December night when he saw the glitch, Ethan realized something. If the system could duplicate a result, even briefly, even in error, that meant the randomness wasn't perfect. There was a pattern, a structure, an exploitable algorithm. He finished his shift at midnight, went home, and instead of sleeping, started researching. Ethan's first step was gathering data. He needed to see if the glitch was isolated or if there were broader patterns in how the digital roulette wheels generated results. The Nova Star, like most modern casinos, streamed their roulette results to mobile betting apps. It was a marketing feature. People could watch live results, track hot and cold numbers, feel like they were participating even from home. The data feed was public, freely accessible through the casino's app. Ethan downloaded historical results, weeks of data, tens of thousands of spins across all 4 roulette terminals at the Nova Star. He imported the data into statistical analysis software and started looking for patterns. At first, everything looked random. The distribution was normal. No single number appeared significantly more than others. The variance was within expected parameters. But then Ethan started analyzing temporal patterns. Not which numbers appeared, but when they appeared. He looked at result sequences over time, checking for clustering, for periodic repetitions, for any structure in the randomness. And he found something. Every few hundred spins, there were subtle clusters. Numbers would repeat in predictable cycles. Not obvious cycles, not the kind of pattern a casual observer would notice, but statistically significant deviations from true randomness. Ethan graphed the results. He ran chi-square tests. He analyzed autocorrelation. The patterns were there, faint but consistent. The digital wheels weren't truly random. They were pseudo-random, using an algorithm that repeated after a certain number of iterations. And because the algorithm was synchronized with the casino's central server to log results in real time, there was a timing component, a rhythm. Ethan spent the entire Christmas break analyzing the data. He built models. He simulated millions of spins. He tested different theories about how the RNG might be structured. By January 2020, he had a hypothesis. The quantum spin gaming wheels used a linear congruential generator, a common pseudo-random algorithm seeded by the system clock at startup and reseeded periodically based on the number of spins. The synchronization with the central server created microsecond delays that affected the seed values, creating predictable patterns in the output. It wasn't perfect prediction. Ethan couldn't tell you exactly which number would come up next, but he could predict zones, sections of the wheel where results would cluster with about 62% accuracy. And in roulette, where the house edge is only about 2.7%, a 62% predictive advantage was enormous. Ethan calculated the expected value. With optimal betting and proper bankroll management, he could maintain a consistent edge of about 1.7%. Small, but sustainable. And given enough time and capital, 1.7% edge could generate unlimited profits. Ethan sat in his bedroom, looking at his simulations, understanding what he'd discovered. He'd found a way to beat the house. Not through cheating, not through devices or collusion, just through mathematics, through understanding the system better than the people who built it. He thought about his student loans, about his parents struggling to pay rent, about working 2 jobs just to stay in school, and about the exhaustion and stress and constant feeling of being one emergency away from having to drop out. And he thought about the casino industry, about billions of dollars built on the premise that the house always wins, about a system designed to take money from people who couldn't afford to lose it. Ethan made a decision. He was going to test his theory, and if it worked, he was going to take everything he could. But he needed help. Ethan knew he couldn't do this alone. He needed someone to verify his mathematics, to check his work, to make sure he wasn't seeing patterns that didn't exist. He needed someone he could trust absolutely. He chose Jamie Lynn. Jamie was 24, a graduate assistant in the statistics department at UNLV. She'd been Ethan's TA for a probability theory course in his junior year. They'd stayed friendly after the class ended, occasionally grabbing coffee to discuss research papers or mathematical concepts. Jamie was brilliant. She had a master's in statistics, was working on her PhD, and had a gift for seeing flaws in analytical models. If Ethan's theory was wrong, Jamie would find the mistake. They met at a coffee shop near campus in early January. Ethan brought his laptop and a stack of printed data. "I need your help with something," Ethan said. "A research project, but it's unconventional." Jamie stirred her coffee. "Unconventional how?" "I've been analyzing casino roulette data, digital wheels. I think I found a predictable bias in the RNG algorithm." Jamie's expression shifted from curiosity to skepticism. "That's a pretty big claim. Casino RNGs are tested extensively. If there was a bias, it would have been caught." "I know, but look at this." Ethan opened his laptop and showed her the graphs, the clustering patterns, the statistical tests. Jamie leaned in, studying the data. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "This is interesting, but it could be noise. You're analyzing thousands of data points. Sometimes patterns appear in random data just by chance." "I know. That's why I need you to verify it. Run your own tests. Use different methods. See if you get the same results." "Why are you doing this?" Jamie asked. "This isn't for a class. This is something else." Ethan looked at her. "Because if I'm right, we could use this. We could actually beat roulette, make real money, not millions. Just enough to change our lives. That's gambling. It's mathematics. If I can predict outcomes with better than random accuracy, it's not gambling. It's calculated risk." Jamie sat back. "You're talking about actually going to casinos and betting on this. After we verify it works, after we test it thoroughly. But yes, that's fraud, Ethan, or exploitation. The casinos won't just let you walk away with their money. I'm not cheating. I'm using publicly available data and mathematical analysis. If they designed a flawed system, that's not my fault." Jamie thought about this. She thought about her own student debt, about her stipend that barely covered rent, about years of graduate school ahead of her, with no guarantee of a decent job at the end. "Let me analyze your data," she said finally. "If I can verify your findings, we'll talk about what comes next." Over the next 2 weeks, Jamie ran her own statistical analysis. She used different software, different testing methods, different approaches to verify Ethan's claims. And every test came back the same. The quantum spin gaming wheels had a detectable bias. The clustering was real. The predictive advantage was real. Jamie called Ethan on a Friday night. "You're right. The pattern exists. It's subtle, but it's there. So we can do this?" "I don't know if we should, but we can." "Jamie, I'm going to try this with or without you, but I'd rather have you there, checking the math, making sure I'm not screwing up. I'll split everything 50-50. Jamie was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Okay, but we do this carefully. We test small. We stay disciplined. And if it stops working, we walk away." "Deal." For the next month, Ethan and Jamie prepared like researchers approaching an experiment. They weren't gambling. They were testing a hypothesis under controlled conditions. Ethan built a predictive model. It wasn't complex by modern computing standards, just a Python script that took input data from the casino's live results feed, analyzed recent spin patterns, identified clustering tendencies, and predicted which zones of the wheel were most likely to produce results in the next few spins. The model wasn't perfect. It couldn't predict exact numbers, but it could identify sections of the wheel, clusters of 6 to 8 numbers, that had elevated probability based on where the algorithm was in its cycle. Jamie verified the model's logic. She ran back tests against historical data, checking how often the predictions would have been correct. The accuracy was about 62% for predicted zones. Better than random, worse than certainty, but enough. They decided to start small. Test the model at the Novastar first, where Ethan worked and knew the environment. Use minimal capital. See if theory translated to practice. On February 15, 2020, Ethan and Jamie walked into the Nova Star Casino with $200. Ethan's entire student loan refund for the spring semester. It was everything they could afford to lose. They sat at adjacent digital roulette terminals. Ethan had his phone, running the predictive app disguised as a calculator. Jamie had a notebook, tracking results manually as a backup. First spin. The model predicted zone 3, numbers 12 through 19. Ethan bet $5 across those 8 numbers. Total risk, $40. The ball landed on 16. Win, Ethan collected $180. Second spin. Model predicted zone 1, numbers 1 through 8. Ethan bet across the zone. Ball landed on 4. Win again. They played for 2 hours, 27 spins. The model predicted correctly on 17 of them. About 63% accuracy, exactly as the backtest had suggested. They walked out with $840, a 420% return on investment. In the parking lot, sitting in Ethan's 10-year-old Honda, they looked at each other. "It works," Jamie said. "It works," Ethan agreed. "So what do we do now?" Ethan thought about this, about what they'd just proven, about the mathematics that had just translated into real money, about the system they'd cracked. "We scale up, carefully, different casinos, different sessions. We build a bankroll and see how far we can take this." Over the next 2 months, they refined their approach. They identified which casinos used quantum spin gaming wheels. They created a rotation schedule, never hitting the same property more than once a week. They established betting protocols. Never bet more than 2% of their bankroll on a single spin. Always track results. Always verify the model's predictions against reality. The winnings accumulated. 800 became 3,000. 3,000 became 12,000. 12,000 became 47,000. By April, they had enough money to start betting seriously. They opened accounts at multiple casinos under their real names. There was nothing illegal about what they were doing, so there was no need for fake IDs or subterfuge. They were just players with a system. They increased their bet sizes. Instead of $5 per number, they bet 20, then 50, then 100. The pattern held. 62% accuracy, consistent across different properties, different wheels, different times. The algorithm was universal. Every quantum spin gaming wheel had the same flaw. By June, their bankroll had crossed $1 million, and they were just getting started. Summer 2020. COVID-19 was disrupting the world, but Las Vegas was still operating, though with reduced capacity and safety protocols. For Ethan and Jamie, the pandemic was actually an advantage. Fewer people meant less attention, more available terminals, easier access to the wheels they needed. They'd developed a sophisticated system by now. It was elegant in its simplicity, but required precise execution. Jamie handled the data collection and real-time analysis. She'd arrive at a casino first, sit at a digital roulette terminal, and start tracking results. She wouldn't bet initially, just watch. Her laptop would be open, ostensibly for work or study. Actually, she was running Ethan's predictive model, feeding it live data from the terminal in front of her and from the casino's public results feed. After about 20 spins, the model would have enough current data to identify where the algorithm was in its cycle. Jamie would then text Ethan a coded message. Something innocuous. Coffee ready meant the model was calibrated and predictions were reliable. Traffic's bad meant the algorithm was in an unpredictable phase. Don't play yet. Nice weather meant conditions were optimal. Ethan would arrive separately, never acknowledging Jamie. He'd sit at a different terminal, sometimes across the room. He'd check his phone for Jamie's predictions, disguised as casual texts. Lunch at 12 meant bet on zone 1. Meeting at 3 wires meant zone 3. The numbers corresponded to sections of the roulette wheel they'd memorized. Ethan would place his bets based on these predictions. He'd spread his money across 6 to 8 numbers in the predicted zone, making it look like he was betting on a section rather than following any system. Sometimes he deliberately bet on non-predicted zones to maintain the appearance of normal play. Lose a little, win a lot, keep the pattern believable. To casual observers, they didn't look like a team. Just 2 separate players who happened to be in the casino at the same time. One woman working on her laptop between occasional small bets. One guy playing roulette with apparent confidence, but no obvious system. They rotated between properties constantly. Monday at the Mirage Crown, Wednesday at the Sapphire Palace, Friday at the Golden Star, Sunday at the Crystal Bay. Any casino that used quantum spin gaming wheels and had decent betting limits. Each session was carefully structured, never more than 3 hours, never more than 25 spins of actual betting. The model needed fresh data, needed to recalibrate as the algorithm cycled through its patterns. Playing too long in one session actually decreased their edge as the algorithm's phase shifted. Their betting patterns looked natural, even lucky. They'd vary their bet sizes based on their current bankroll. Sometimes Ethan would bet $50 per number, sometimes $200. Sometimes, when the model showed particularly strong clustering, $500. The money accumulated at an astonishing rate. In March, they made $400,000. In April, $700,000. In May, $1.2 million. Each month, their bankroll grew, allowing larger bets, generating larger returns in a virtuous cycle that seemed unstoppable. Security noticed their wins. Of course they did. But nothing triggered major alarms. Ethan and Jamie were winning consistently, but not impossibly. They had good nights and bad nights, though the good ones outweighed the bad by careful design. Their win rate was about 62%, which looked like skill and discipline rather than exploitation. One evening in early June, they had a close call at the Crystal Bay Casino. Ethan was up $80,000 in a single session when a floor manager approached his terminal. The manager was a woman in her 40s named Susan, professional and watchful. She smiled politely. "Sir, you're having an excellent night." Ethan looked up, keeping his expression friendly but slightly tired. "Yeah, finally getting lucky. Been losing for weeks." "You play here often?" "Few times a month. I like the roulette terminals." "You seem very confident in your betting pattern." Ethan shrugged. "I've been studying roulette strategy, betting on sections, managing my bankroll. Nothing complicated." Susan nodded, but Ethan saw her making notes on a tablet. She was flagging him, recording his player ID. The session would be reviewed. Ethan played 3 more spins, deliberately lost on all 3, then cashed out. He texted Jamie a warning. Meeting canceled. They didn't return to the Crystal Bay for 3 weeks. When they did return, they played smaller, kept their wins modest, and left after just an hour. The heat died down. By July, they'd crossed $15 million in total winnings. Ethan quit his job at the Nova Star. He couldn't keep bussing tables while sitting on millions. He told his boss he'd gotten a research grant, needed to focus on finishing his degree. His boss, a tired man named Tony who'd managed busboys for 20 years, congratulated him without suspicion. "Good for you, kid. You were always too smart for this place." Jamie took a leave of absence from her PhD program, citing family matters. Her advisor, Dr. Richard Walsh, was disappointed but understanding. "Take the time you need, Jamie. Your research will be here when you're ready to return." They moved into a better apartment, nothing extravagant. A nice 2-bedroom in a decent neighborhood near UNLV. They bought reliable cars. Ethan got a 3-year-old Toyota. Jamie bought a used Honda. Nothing flashy, nothing that would draw attention. They paid off their student loans. Ethan sent money to his parents, enough to cover their rent for a year. He told them he'd won a grant. Jamie helped her younger brother with college tuition. But they didn't stop playing. The system worked too well. The edge was too reliable. They were extracting money from an industry built on extracting money from desperate people. It felt in Ethan's mind like justice, like mathematics correcting a fundamental imbalance. They started discussing what would happen when they stopped, when they had enough, what enough even meant. $20 million, Ethan said one night in their apartment. $20 million and we walk away. Never touch roulette again. "That's a lot of money," Jamie said. "It's security, for life, for our families, for whatever we want to do next." "And you think we can get there without getting caught?" "We haven't been caught yet. We're not breaking any laws. We're just playing better than they expected." But Ethan wanted to do something bigger. One last session. One final run at the highest limits available. A farewell to the system they'd beaten. He suggested the Mirage Crown. High-end property, high betting limits. The best quantum spin wheels in Vegas. Jamie was hesitant. That's where surveillance is strongest, where they pay the most attention. Which is why they'll never suspect we're running a system. They think high rollers are just rich people gambling. They won't look at us as advantage players. "One session," Jamie said. "Then we're done. Even if we don't hit 20 million. Deal." On July 28th, 2020, they walked into the Mirage Crown at midnight. The casino was beautiful, even in pandemic restrictions. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, the quiet hum of wealth. They had $2 million in their bankroll. They were prepared to bet big. Jamie set up at a terminal in the corner, her laptop open, tracking results. The algorithm was in a predictable phase. The patterns were clear. This was going to be a good night. Ethan played at a terminal 30 feet away, high limit area. Minimum bet $100, maximum bet $10,000 per number. Jamie's first message came after 15 minutes. Perfect weather, optimal conditions. The model was locked in. Ethan started betting, 500 per number. 8 numbers in the predicted zone, 4,000 per spin, first spin. Zone 2, prediction correct, win. Second spin. Zone 1, prediction correct, win. Third spin. Zone 3, prediction correct, win. The pattern held. Spin after spin, the mathematics worked. 65% accuracy, 70%. The algorithm was in such a predictable phase that Ethan felt like he was watching the future happen exactly as the numbers said it would. 7 hours. Ethan barely took breaks. Jamie fed him predictions continuously. The casino brought him complimentary drinks, which he accepted but barely touched. They treated him like a high roller, which in that moment he was. 32 consecutive profitable runs, not 32 wins. 32 sequences where his wins exceeded his losses significantly enough to generate profit. The numbers kept landing in his zones. 17, 14, 8, 29, 21, 4, 16, 9. Each one a confirmation that the mathematics worked, that the algorithm was predictable, that chaos could be understood. By 7 a.m., Ethan had turned $2 million into $19 million, $17 million in profit. In a single session, he cashed out slowly, converting chips to account credit. The cage manager, a professional woman named Patricia, processed the transaction with practiced efficiency. "Congratulations, sir. Quite a night." "Yeah," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Unbelievable. Will you be staying with us? We can comp you a suite." "No, I have to get home, but thank you." Patricia smiled, but Ethan saw something in her eyes. This transaction would be reported. This level of winning would trigger reviews. In the parking lot, Jamie and Ethan sat in his car in silence for a long moment. "We did it," Jamie said. "We did it," Ethan agreed. "So we're done?" "We're done." They drove home as the sun rose over Las Vegas. 2 math students who'd just beaten the unbeatable game. They didn't celebrate. They just felt exhausted and slightly surreal, like they'd completed an experiment that proved something impossible. 2 days later, when the Nevada Gaming Commission opened an investigation, that feeling of surreality would become something much more serious. But in that moment, driving through the desert dawn with $47 million in winnings, Ethan and Jamie felt like they'd solved the ultimate equation. They'd beaten the house. Not with luck, not with cheating, just with understanding the mathematics better than anyone else. The investigation began with a simple question. How did 2 university students win $47 million from roulette over 8 months? The Gaming Commission pulled every bit of data they could access. Surveillance footage, betting records, win-loss statements, account histories. They brought in forensic analysts, gaming mathematicians, and computer security experts. What they found confused them. Ethan and Jamie weren't using devices. They weren't colluding with dealers because the wheels were automated. They weren't hacking the casino systems. Security scans found no electronic devices beyond their phones, which showed nothing unusual. They were just betting and winning. A lot. The lead investigator, a man named Michael Torres, had seen advantage players before. Card counters, hole carders, edge sorters. But this was different. Roulette wasn't supposed to be beatable. The wheels were random. The outcomes were independent. There was no skill component. Except Ethan and Jamie were winning with statistical consistency that shouldn't be possible. Michael brought in Dr. Elizabeth Park, a mathematics professor and expert in gaming theory. He showed her the betting records, the win rates, the patterns. Dr. Park analyzed the data for 3 days. Then she called Michael. "They found a bias in the RNG," she said. "That's impossible. The wheels are certified. They're tested quarterly. The testing looks for obvious biases, Large-scale patterns. These students found something subtle. Temporal clustering. The kind of thing you'd only notice if you analyze thousands of spins looking specifically for algorithmic repetition. Is that cheating? Legally? No. They're using publicly available data and mathematical analysis. They're not manipulating the game. They're just better at understanding the game than the casinos are. So we can't charge them? Not criminally. They haven't broken any laws. But the casinos could sue civilly for exploitation of proprietary systems. Michael reviewed Nevada gaming statutes. Dr. Park was right. There was no criminal statute that covered what Ethan and Jamie had done. They hadn't cheated in any traditional sense. They'd simply been smarter than the system. But the casinos weren't going to let this go. 3 casinos filed civil suits against Ethan Vale and Jamie Lynn in September 2020. The Mirage Crown, the Sapphire Palace, the Golden Star. Together, they alleged exploitation of proprietary algorithms, unjust enrichment, and violation of the implied covenant of good faith in gaming. The casinos wanted their money back. All $47 million, plus legal fees, plus punitive damages for what they called systematic exploitation of computational vulnerabilities. Ethan and Jamie hired a lawyer, a gaming law specialist named Robert Chen. Robert had defended advantage players before, though nothing on this scale. Card counters, poker players, even a few blackjack team members, but never someone who'd won this much from roulette, a game traditionally considered unbeatable. They met in Robert's office in downtown Las Vegas. The view looked out over the Strip, all those casinos glittering in the desert sun, billions of dollars built on the premise that the house always wins. The casinos are going to argue that you exploited a flaw you knew existed, Robert explained, spreading documents across his conference table, that you acted in bad faith by continuing to play after discovering the bias, that your winnings are illegitimate because they're based on exploiting an error in the system. Is that illegal? Ethan asked. Criminally? No. The Gaming Commission investigated and found no evidence of hacking, device usage, or traditional cheating. But civil law isn't about legality in the criminal sense. It's about whether you owe restitution. The casinos will argue that the money you won wasn't legitimately won because the game was flawed in ways they didn't intend. The game was flawed because they designed it that way, Jamie said. We didn't create the flaw. We didn't manipulate anything. We just noticed a pattern in publicly available data. That's our defense, Robert agreed. You used mathematical analysis of information the casinos themselves provided through their live results feed. You didn't cheat. You didn't hack. You didn't use prohibited devices. You simply played better than they expected anyone could. You beat them with intelligence. Will that work? Ethan asked. Honestly, I don't know. This is unprecedented. There's no case law for someone beating roulette through algorithmic analysis. Card counting is legal, but that's based on information from cards already played. You were predicting future outcomes. Based on patterns in past outcomes, Jamie countered. It's the same principle. Observing the game, identifying bias, adjusting strategy accordingly. Robert nodded. That's what we'll argue. But the casinos have expensive lawyers and a strong interest in winning. They can't let people think roulette is beatable. It would cost them hundreds of millions if players thought there was a system. The case went to mediation first, as most civil suits do. The casinos offered a settlement in November. Return $30 million, keep $17 million. Sign a non-disclosure agreement. Never play in Nevada casinos again. Move on with your lives quietly. Ethan and Jamie discussed it for exactly 5 minutes before refusing. We didn't do anything wrong, Ethan said to Robert. We won that money fairly. I'm not giving it back because the casinos didn't design their systems properly. They're going to make this difficult, Robert warned. They'll dig into your backgrounds. They'll paint you as scam artists who exploited vulnerable systems. They'll make you look like criminals, even though you're not. Let them try, Jamie said. The mathematics speaks for itself. The case went to trial in January 2021 in Clark County District Court. Judge Sandra Morrison presiding. A jury of 8 selected from the general population, none of them mathematicians, most of them local residents who probably gambled occasionally. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The courtroom was a theater, both sides performing for a jury that would decide whether intelligence and mathematical skill constituted unfair advantage. The casinos brought in expert witnesses. Marcus Webb, a gaming mathematician who designed RNG systems for 20 years. The quantum spin gaming algorithm is certified as random by independent testing laboratories, Dr. Webb testified. It meets all regulatory requirements. Any patterns the defendants claim to have found are either statistical noise or a result of data mining thousands of spins until coincidental clusters appeared. Robert cross-examined. Dr. Webb, is it possible for a pseudo-random number generator to have subtle biases that aren't detected in standard testing? Theoretically, yes, but those biases would be so minor as to be undetectable in practical play. Unless someone analyzed enough data specifically looking for temporal clustering, even then, the bias would be negligible. Yet the defendants won $47 million. Does that sound negligible? Dr. Webb had no good answer. The casinos brought in security directors who testified about their surveillance systems, about how thoroughly they monitor play, about how the defendants' win rate was statistically impossible through normal play. Their win rate over 8 months was approximately 62%, testified Linda Patterson, security director for the Mirage Crown. In roulette, with proper random outcomes, no betting strategy can overcome the house edge. A 62% win rate over thousands of spins is impossible without some form of advantage. Robert cross-examined again. Mirror. Patterson, is it illegal to have an advantage in casino games? If that advantage is gained through cheating, yes. But the Gaming Commission investigated and found no evidence of cheating, correct? Correct. So the defendants simply had an advantage through skill and analysis? Through exploitation of a system flaw? A flaw the defendants didn't create and the casinos didn't know existed? Linda hesitated. Yes. Thank you. No further questions. Then Ethan testified. Robert had coached him extensively. Be clear. Be honest. Explain the mathematics in terms the jury can understand. Don't be arrogant. Show them you're just a student who understood something complex. Ethan took the stand wearing a simple suit, looking younger than his 23 years. He explained his discovery step by step, the glitch he'd observed at the Nova Star, the data analysis, the pattern recognition, the model he'd built. The casino's attorney, an aggressive man named Gerald Foster, cross-examined. Mr. Vale, did you know you were exploiting a flaw in the casino system? I knew the system wasn't perfectly random, Ethan said, but perfect randomness is impossible in computer-generated systems. Pseudo-random number generators always have patterns if you analyze enough data. I just found the pattern in this particular system. And you continued playing even after you knew you had an unfair advantage? I don't think it was unfair. The casino set the rules. They provided the data feed. I used legal methods to analyze that data and identify patterns. How is that different from card counting in blackjack, which is legal? Card counting is based on information from cards that have been played. You were predicting future outcomes based on patterns in past outcomes. It's the same principle. Observation, analysis, strategy adjustment. Mr. Vale, did it ever occur to you that maybe you shouldn't be winning millions of dollars from a game that's supposed to be random? It occurred to me that the game wasn't as random as advertised. But that's not my fault. I didn't design the system. Gerald changed tactics. You're a mathematics student. You must have studied ethics in gaming, the principle that players shouldn't exploit system errors. I studied mathematics, probability theory, statistical analysis. I didn't study casino ethics. I studied how to understand systems. And I applied that knowledge to a system that was available for analysis. So you felt no moral obligation to inform the casinos that their system was flawed? Ethan paused. This was the moment Robert had warned him about. Be honest, but don't apologize. No, Ethan said. The casinos make billions of dollars from systems designed to take money from people who can't afford to lose it. They use mathematics to ensure the house always wins. I use mathematics to tip that equation the other way. I don't think that's immoral. Gerald tried to make Ethan look like a con artist, but it didn't work. The jury could see a smart kid who'd worked hard, who'd studied mathematics, who'd found something unexpected and used it. Not a criminal, a scholar. Jamie testified next. She explained the statistical methods they'd used, the verification process, the testing they'd done before risking real money. We treated this like a research project, Jamie said. We formed a hypothesis. We collected data. We tested the hypothesis. We documented results. We followed the scientific method. The scientific method doesn't usually end with taking $47 million from casinos, Gerald said. It does when the scientific method proves that a supposedly random system isn't actually random, Jamie replied. The jury saw two students, smart kids who'd grown up working class, who'd struggled through school, who'd found something remarkable through intelligence and effort. Not criminals, not cheaters, just better at math than the casinos expected. Robert gave his closing argument on a Friday afternoon. The courtroom was packed. Media had picked up the story. Math students beating Vegas. It was compelling. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert addressed the jury, the casinos want you to believe that using your brain is cheating, that analyzing publicly available data is exploitation, that being smarter than the system is unfair. But that's not the law. The law says you can't hack computers. You can't use devices. You can't manipulate games. Ethan Vale and Jamie Lynn did none of those things. They used mathematics. They used intelligence. They used skills they learned in school. The casinos built a system with a flaw. My clients found that flaw. That's not a crime. That's not even unethical. That's just being better at mathematics than billion-dollar corporations. Gerald gave his closing for the casinos. He argued that the defendants had systematically exploited a vulnerability they knew existed, that their winnings were unjust enrichment, that they owed restitution. Judge Sandra Morrison gave her instructions to the jury. They deliberated for 2 days. On the third day, they returned a verdict in favor of Ethan Vale and Jamie Lynn. No restitution owed. The defendants had used legal methods. The casinos were responsible for their own system flaws. The courtroom erupted. The casino's lawyers immediately announced they would appeal. Robert hugged Ethan and Jamie, all three of them stunned by the victory. "We won," Jamie said, barely believing it. "We won," Ethan confirmed. The casinos did appeal. The case went to the Nevada Court of Appeals. The appellate court upheld the verdict in a 4-1 decision. The dissenting judge argued that exploitation of system flaws should constitute unjust enrichment, regardless of technical legality, but he was outvoted. Ethan Vale and Jamie Lynn had legally won $47 million by being smarter than the House. The case set precedent. Intelligence isn't cheating. Mathematics isn't fraud. Understanding systems better than the people who design them isn't exploitation. The broke student who bussed tables had beaten Vegas, and he got to keep every dollar. Ethan and Jamie disappeared from public view after the trial. They'd both become minor celebrities in mathematics and gaming circles, but they wanted privacy. Ethan finished his degree at UNLV remotely, graduating with honors in 2021. He published a paper on pseudo-random number generation in gaming systems that became required reading in probability theory courses. Jamie completed her PhD in statistics. Her dissertation was on detecting non-random patterns in ostensibly random systems. Neither of them ever gambled again. They didn't need to. The money was invested conservatively. Trusts were set up for their families. Ethan's parents retired comfortably. Jamie's student loans were paid off. Rumor has it Ethan now teaches mathematics at a university in Europe under a different name. Some say he consults for gaming companies, helping them design truly random systems. Others claim he developed a new algorithm and plays online roulette anonymously. Jamie reportedly works in data science for a tech company, analyzing patterns in financial markets. The casinos never recovered the $47 million. It was written off as an operational loss. But the incident changed the industry permanently. Within 6 months of the trial, every quantum spin gaming wheel in Nevada was replaced. The company's RNG algorithm was completely redesigned. Independent testing became more rigorous. Temporal pattern analysis became part of standard certification. The gaming industry learned a hard lesson. The house always wins, except when someone understands the mathematics better than the house does. Ethan Vale proved that chance isn't random. It's just complex. And complexity can be understood, modeled, and exploited by anyone patient enough to look for the patterns. He didn't cheat. He didn't hack. He didn't steal. He just did the math. And sometimes when you do the math perfectly, you beat the unbeatable system. The broke student from Henderson who bussed tables to pay for college became the man who broke roulette. Not with luck, not with devices, just with the one thing casinos never expected players to have, a better understanding of their own systems than they had themselves.